Right. Well, hello, Bruins, and welcome to the UCLA Alumni Downtown Los Angeles Network Personal Finance webinar. My name is Lauren Vivena, and I serve as the Director of Regional Communities at the UCLA Alumni Association. And, first off, I want to acknowledge that this is, truly an unprecedented time. And the UCLA Alumni Association is working hard to support you with resources and many virtual events to help keep you informed and engaged. And I'm very excited that I have Ceasar and Phil, two financial advisors, with me today. So thank you both so much for your time. And before we get started, I want to address just a few housekeeping items for today's session. We'll have about 40 to 45 minutes of content, and then we'll leave a good chunk of time for Q&A. And so please feel free to utilize the Q&A feature below to submit your questions. And then we also received many of your questions that you submitted when you registered. So we'll review those as well. And lastly, this webinar will be recorded, so you will have access to that on the UCLA Alumni YouTube page. And we'll also be sharing Phil and Ceasar's contact information after the session if you have any further questions. So now we'll get started, and I will turn it over to our guests, Ceasar and Phil, to introduce themselves. So Ceasar, would you like to go first?
Absolutely, Lauren, thank you so much. And hello, fellow Bruins, great to be here. Hope everybody's being safe in this crazy time, but glad you're with us right now. A little bit about myself. My name is Ceasar Garvida. I am a certified financial planner. I have been doing this for the better part of my 22nd year. Like I said, I'm a certified financial planner. My main focus has been on high net worth financial planning for individuals and business owners, as well as financial planning for families, dynastic planning. And I've worked for a number of firms, Morgan Stanley, Smith Barney, Merrill Lynch, and actually at Smith Barney is where I met my partner, Phil. Phil?
Yep. Thanks, Ceasar. Yep, my name's Phil Argue. The founder of Prepared Capital, Ceasar and I's company, started back in 2017. I spent 10 years at Morgan Stanley where I met Ceasar, mainly in management roles. So I was working with financial advisors across the Los Angeles area, helping them in terms of using the firm's research and technology to provide better advice and get better solutions to their clients. So I left in 2017 to start our own company. And here we are.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for taking the time to speak with us. This pandemic has been really unnerving for a lot of us. And now more than ever, I think we're all looking a little bit more closely at our finances. And, whether, somebody's been laid off or furloughed, or our business owner, or maybe they're still employed, but they're worried about layoffs and worried about the economy. So, this is really important time to talk about personal finance. And so I think, many of us may not have imagined 3 to 4 months ago that we'd be in a situation that our cash flow would fluctuate or even stop. And some people are living paycheck to paycheck and are also dealing with debt. And so I'd like to start off the conversation by asking both of you, what advice do you have to help us immediately get more money back into our pocket? Where should we be looking?
That's a great question, Lauren. And to your point, now is a good time to kind of batten down the hatches, tighten up your cash flows. So some of the more immediate things you can do for, a lot of us are in LA, Southern California, we're all driving. Call up your insurance company. As a result of COVID-19, people aren't driving at all or much less. A lot of insurance companies are willing to rebate you at least a portion of your annual premiums. So that's an easy call. If they haven't already proactively done that, go ahead and give them a call. In addition to that, for those of us who have home mortgages and are struggling, give your mortgage company a call and ask them to work with you. And you can, most likely, everyone can get either a deferral or a forbearance of their mortgage payments, which can greatly help your cash flow situation.
Do you mind explaining the difference between forbearance and deferment, just so people know which one might be recommended?
Fair enough. Okay. So with deferral, the mortgage company agrees to give you a certain amount of time and where you don't have to make payments. However, at the end of that period of time, they may expect a lump sum payment. So if you're having cash flow problems, it might not be so helpful, right? If you were furloughed or lost a job, deferral probably isn't what you want to be looking for. Now, as opposed to forbearance, where they would hit the pause button on your mortgage. So for many people out there, let's say with a 30-year fixed mortgage, 30-year fix, that's 360 payments over 360 months. In forbearance, they'll allow you to, again, hit the pause button and say, okay, we'll allow you to make the 360 payments over 300 let's say 63 months, allowing you to pay it at the back end of your mortgage. So between the two, you want to get a forbearance. But again, talk to your mortgage company. The challenge is the mortgage companies also flip these terms around sometimes. So you want to be very, very clear on what it is you're going to be getting from them, and see if there's any ramifications, like are there hits to your credit. You want to know these things before you do either one of them.
So Ceasar, let me ask you a question with that. Is, in your experience with working with our clients and things, have you found that when people call in to talk to their mortgage provider, the first answer they get is usually the right one? Or is it something that if you call back multiple times, you might get a different answer depending on which sort of service provider you speak to? Is that?
Yeah, so I will say this. The experience is widespread, which is why I say, you know, I would highly recommend that you call them, and more likely than not, every mortgage company that I've dealt with on behalf of clients or with clients will give you that deferral. They'll give you the deferral because it's the least of all evils for them, right? They're willing to do that without much effort. However, if you need a forbearance for whatever reason, they will. That takes a little more doing. Like I said, you definitely want to. You got to call them, and depending on who you talk to, on any given day, you're gonna get a different answer. You're just gonna get a different answer. But that's Buster. He's saying go Bruins. 8 clapping it.
So, when you're calling up these insurance companies, do you need to go in with a specific ask? Should you have a script of what you're saying, or should you just, be asking point blank, this is what I'm looking for?
Be honest. You just got to be honest with giving your situation. Look, no one wants to foreclose, right? But the fact of the matter is we are in tough times. Everyone's hurting one way or another. So be honest, be persistent, and have them work with you. They would rather work with you. Mortgage companies would rather work with you than have a bunch of defaults on their hands. That's just end all be all. So, but it will take a lot of persistence because their phones are ringing off the hook right now.
Yeah, I'm like, are they even responsive right now?
It's tough. It is tough, but people have been successful in getting deferrals.
Mm-hmm.
So how about talking a little bit about emergency savings? I think a lot of people have questions about, maybe some people do have an emergency savings, and others, are just starting to think about it now. So what's the rule of thumb? Like, how much should you have stocked away, and what type of account should that be in?
Really, really great question. So the adage is you should have at least 3 months of liquid savings. What I mean by that is if you spend, and I'm just going to throw a number out, $5,000 a month between your mortgage, your car payments, this, that, and the other, you're going to want to have at least $15,000. That's a 3x liquid in. And what I mean by liquid is you can get hold of those monies relatively quickly. You don't have to sell anything. It's readily available to you. However, in these kind of interesting times, 3 months may not be enough. So I would probably prescribe somewhere in the vicinity of 6 to 9 months. Because for those people who may be furloughed or out of work, in this environment, who knows how long it's going to take to get another job. And as far as, where should I keep it? Should I keep it under my mattress? Should I keep it in a checking account? I'd recommend like an online bank. I think you're going to get a better interest rate than your standard checking account, which I think is returning. What's the latest return, Phil, on a checking account?
They've all dropped to near zero now. So if you can get 0.25%, you might be lucky. So,
and it's really not for the investment purpose, right? You're not looking for, I want to get 1% versus 0.5%. I just need it liquid, I need it safe, I need it accessible.
So how about for those people who are experiencing cash flow issues, would you, if they really need to just cover their basic expenses, would you recommend dipping into reserved accounts like savings and retirement accounts?
That's a good question. Well, it's certainly savings, right? If I have to stack rank it, I'd dip into savings. I'd stay away from credit cards, obviously, with their draconian interest rates. I think the last thing, though, you want to do is pull out of retirement unless you really, really have to. For those of us with long time horizons for retirement, remember, $1 today is $3 tomorrow. So if you start rating your retirement fund now, it's going to cost you in the end.
Any other tips about cash flow and savings?
So we talked about mortgages. For those of us with auto loans, call them up. Definitely give them a call, explain your circumstances. They will give you, deferral or a forbearance. They'll work with you, right? These are trying times. They understand it. They don't want to repo cars. You want to give them a call, and you might be able to refinance with them at a lower rate. So there's a lot of different options that they can pull out. So I guess a general rule of thumb would be anyone who you owe money to, whether it be credit cards, auto loans, mortgages, call them up and have a conversation with them and be honest.
That's great.
Caesar, would you say that spills over into the people who are renting as well? What's your experience with people getting some sort of relief on rent payments? Do you have any insight there?
Not as much. I will say, I will say it's kind of the same thing, but the challenge with renting, though, is there's layers, right? If renters don't pay the rent, then the landlords can't pay the mortgage, and so there becomes like layers of default, and so that's a real big challenge. But again, in these trying times, you have to talk to your landlord. Some landlords are really great about it, and some landlords aren't. That's just the bottom line.
So Caesar, before we switch over to a different topic, there's a good little question in the queue here. If you had to prioritize, would you prioritize paying down credit card debt first, or maintaining your safety reserve, that your emergency fund?
Right.
How would you prioritize the two?
That's I mean, if a person is in a situation where, let's say, they lost a job, I would likely just pay the minimums on the credit card until I could find another job, because you want to keep your safety reserve intact. If you're not having any problems with cash flow, and you're kind of a net positive every month, you're going to want to tackle your credit card debt sooner rather than later. That make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Now let's transition the conversation over to long-term investments. I've often been hearing that people are worried about the turn in the stock market and how this is impacting their retirement plans, their stock portfolios. And I think the main reaction is like, I'm getting nervous. Like, should I pull out now or should I stay the course? Especially those who are nearing retirement. So how would you approach long-term investments at this point in time when there's so much economic uncertainty?
Yeah, there's no shortage of that. But so I think first and foremost, I'd say, look, your emotions typically are your worst enemy when it comes to investments. And so in periods when things are scary, are often the periods where future returns going forward are pretty good. You go back to the last economic downturn that we had in 2008 and 2009. Nobody wanted to go anywhere near the stock market, and it was this that recession took 18 months or so. And by the end, by the time that the stock market finally bottomed, nobody wanted to have anything to do with the stock market, real estate, anything. And sure enough, if you could have gone back there with a crystal ball, the next 10 years after that were a great 10 years. Just happens to be this is now about 11 years after that. So you got to have some system for keeping your emotions in check. And over the last 4 months, there has been enough stuff thrown at us that everybody's had their emotions kind of get involved in something, whether it's, the coronavirus, the, lockdown of the economy. Now we've got, civil unrest. And so I think probably the most important thing that people should be thinking about is having some sort of a written plan for how you handle your investments. Probably the biggest mistake that people face is they focus on what should I do with my investments right now, as opposed to how can I put a system in place where whether I'm talking about June of 2020 or September of 2021, I've got a process that puts the odds in my favor when it comes to investing. And so having a written plan that's based on some historical statistics drastically improves your results. So for example, if you look at the history of the stock market, just in general, if you looked at any given year, you've got about a 57% chance in any given year of making money, okay, of your investment going up, over a 12-year period of time. But if you take that to a 5-year period of time, the probability of being up over a 5-year period is more like 86%, right? So by just taking a longer term approach to your investments, you can improve the probability of of having a likely or a positive outcome. So think less about what should I do with my investments right now, and more about what sort of process can I put in place to ensure that I don't get myself in trouble because I get scared. My emotions take control of it. And it's a process that I can draw back on or go back to and make a decision in the future as well. So one thing that I would say now, the stock market has gotten it seems very disconnected from the overall economy. This morning, the latest number was about 22 million people are now on unemployment insurance. And the NASDAQ this morning, so the technology stocks, hit a new all-time high just this morning. So you've got the economy going one way, the stock market going the other. And this is an instance where you want to be able to draw back on your, hopefully a written out investment strategy that says, okay, even when things get a little goofy, I'm going to stick to my plan. So that way, what to do and when. So anyway, that was
emotion is a bad thing when deciding on your investments. It is the death knell for investments. If you decide to invest on a whim, or because the person down the street said, oh, buy Zoom, it's so hot right now. Like, take a minute. If you're hearing it from such and such, by the time it gets to you, so that's not a sound investment strategy, is what Phil is talking about. And I know, Phil, you had mentioned this before. Like, we should be managing expectations on our investments going forward.
Yeah. So I highlighted that how go back to the end of the last recession where nobody wanted to be invested, and 10 years forward, the returns have been great from pick any point, 2009, 2010, all the way up to here. Going forward, the next 5 years or 10 years, you probably want to reset your expectations as far as the expected rate of return of your investments. If you look at any sort of market history, the average long run is people say, the stock market usually does 9.5% or so. But given that we've had such a great run over the last 10 years, and how fragile, let's say, the economy is right now, over the next couple years, it's better to manage your expectations. So if you don't see great returns over the next couple years, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get those long-term results. It means you've got to stay disciplined and stay the course and adhere to your plan, because we don't know when the stock market's going to have another, amazing run. Your goal is to make sure that you're invested for when that amazing run does occur. And, from time to time, we're going to have these, periods like we had back in March where we had a real steep decline. And so I think that managing expectations, especially given everything that's going on, short term, is a really helpful exercise, because it helps you keep your emotions in check, and therefore, you're less likely to make a mistake.
Hey, Phil, there's a great question. By the way, Jason, if you see your question on Bitcoin, feel free to contact us about that. I think right now that falls outside of the spectrum of what we're talking about today. But there was another question, and I'm going to read it to you, Phil. With respect to comment on having a system versus making investments, how would you view having diversification across sectors through ETFs and mutual funds versus picking individual stocks?
Okay, interesting. So I'll share a statistic with you that if you look at so there are thousands of mutual funds out there, tens of thousands of mutual funds, and they're all run by really smart people, went to, the best schools, and have been trying to pick stocks and beat the stock market for a really long time. And there is a study that I believe is done by Dow Jones, where they track the performance of these people trying to pick stocks to beat the stock market. And over any 5-year period of time, it's just shy of 90% of them fail to beat the stock market, right? And so trying to pick stocks yourself is a very difficult exercise. There are tons of really smart people that try it and don't succeed. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. Like, if you feel really passionate about, pick a stock, it doesn't matter. If you're passionate about it, that's fine, and you want to invest in it, but make sure you do it in a way that is within an overall plan. So you'd say, okay, maybe I'll invest in an individual stock with 5% of my portfolio or 10% of my portfolio. But I think thinking that you can go out and say, hey, I'm going to buy Zoom today or Amazon, and I'm going to always be ahead of the curve. There's an awful lot of statistics that would say that that's a losing proposition, and you're better off being diversified with, ETFs, stocks and bonds with a balanced portfolio, and you rebalance on a periodic basis. So, you rebalance quarterly or semi-annually, and you can start to reduce the variability of your investment portfolio over the long run. And that's what we spend a lot of our time trying to do is reduce variables. So, we don't know what an individual stock's going to do over the next 5 years, but the odds that the stock market is going to provide, the broad stock market is going to provide a more predictable rate of return is highly likely. Even though we don't know exactly what it is, there's less variance in the overall stock market than there is in individual securities. I don't know. Was that a good answer?
I think it's great. Just to dovetail on that, not to say that a personal portfolio can't have individual stocks. I think having individual stocks is great for kind of an ancillary position. Once you've established a solid base of, ETFs and your bonds, and once you have that, then certainly smaller pieces of the pie can be dedicated to certain stocks that you're passionate about for whatever reason. But again, and it's just to mitigate your downside risk, because you don't want to bet the farm on Zoom. No one wants to bet the farm on Zoom. Maybe there are some people, but as a planner, I'd probably stay away from that, though.
So Phil, you were saying earlier that, we have time for the market to come back, but that's going to take a few years, right? And so what about the people who were planning to retire next year? Should they still stick with their original plan, and should they still retire?
Well, so look, most of the clients we're working with, we've got investment plans that go 10 to 30 years, some even 40 years for people that are younger. Mm-hmm. What happens over the course of a month, a quarter, 6 months, like well, the last 6 months have been, in some cases, the most volatile in the history of the stock market. If you look at where we are now, we're actually right back to where we were at the beginning of the year. It's hard to believe that we had this huge, decline in the stock market, and now it's bounced all the way back. And so for somebody who's looking at, hey, I'm going to retire in the next few years, the goal should be not what do I do in the next 6 months? Mm-hmm. It's, okay, can my portfolio provide me the income I need to maintain my, quality of life that I want to have for the next 20 years in retirement, or whatever that number is. And you want to work backwards from there. So usually in that case, whatever happens in any given month or quarter in the stock market shouldn't have that big, isn't going to have that big of an impact. However, I will say one thing, given now that interest rates are, almost zero, some interest rates are zero now, it is going to be a challenge to generate income, especially for somebody who's close to retirement. They want to be able to generate a certain amount of income to supplement their Social Security, and that's what they're going to live off of. We may have to recalibrate just how much income their portfolio could generate. But again, I don't think it's not something that you all of a sudden in one day, we're going to make a wholesale change and say, okay, you've got to change your 20-year plan because something that happened in the last 3 months. I think typically what happens if you exercise some patience, things don't change on a dime that quickly.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense. And we do have an interesting question, and I think I know the answer to it. But before the COVID-19 crisis, I have been saving 15% of my income to my 401k. Given the hit that these savings took, I changed that to 4%, the minimum required for my company to match it. Is that smart, or should I change it back to 15%, thinking that I could recover in 5 years or so?
This is a very, very common question. A lot of our clients have asked it. And the general answer is, without knowing any specifics, is you didn't want to change it. For retirement is a longer time horizon. This too shall pass. Arguably when the market was 30+% down, that's when you would want to have been more aggressive. But at least in retrospect, you want to stay the course, because with the market down and saving 15%, you'd actually be buying at a really great price. So those kind of investments, I'd hold steady. You don't want to stop those retirement contributions, those monthly retirement contributions. Now, however, if assuming that it was you're being reactive to what was going on in the stock market, we want to stay away from that. But if you saw maybe the writing on the wall that things might be a little bit unstable at work, that's a different conversation. But overall, you want to be able to contribute on a monthly basis to your retirement.
That's great. So I'd like to transition the conversation to loans and mortgages. Something that I think is extremely pervasive and many of us are burdened by is student loan debt. And, we've heard that the federal government has suspended student loan payments at this time until I think September. But what advice might you have for tackling student debt right now and perhaps in the future as our economic situation remains in flux?
Student debt, what that feels like. A lot of students now are carrying huge amounts of debt and more than one loan. So there's a couple of really simple things you can do. If you can, try and refinance and consolidate those loans, if that's an option. Another option is, let's say you have multiple loans for, let's say, undergrad, grad school, law school, what have you. I know a lot of people from my law school days, they're still paying off loans and they've got multiple loans. Caesar, I've got 6 different loans for 3 different periods of my life. What do I do? You want to stack rank them. And the most financially efficient way to do that is you want to stack rank them by, you want to pay off the highest interest rate first. Now, from a psychological perspective, you want to pay off the smallest balance first because you want to get that off your plate. But you definitely want to have a systematic way of tackling that debt. Don't just throw the minimum at it every month. You want to concentrate on the higher interest loans or even the smaller balance loans before moving on to the next one. But that is a very, very challenging situation. So definitely have a plan of attack for those loans. When it comes to mortgages, mortgage rates are really, really low right now. I know that there are some clients of mine of ours that have been able to refinance for 2.75 on a 30-year fix, which is amazing. The challenge with that, though, is the standards it's gotten a lot more difficult to refinance. So, when doing a refinance, you want to look at a couple of things. One, you want to look at the rate. That's the most obvious. Second, you want to know what the cost is. Is it going to cost you $3,000 to refinance, $5,000 to refinance? And then you want to juxtapose that to what is it going to save you per month? Am I saving $200 a month, but it's costing me $5,000? Great. Well, if we take a $5,000 expense, a $200 monthly savings, what's your break even? 25 months. So after 25 months, you will be ahead of the game as far as cash flow is concerned. Now, there's another thing that you want to take into account. I'm 10 years into my mortgage, 15 years into my mortgage. Should I refinance? Well, it's a very good question, because by the time you get to your 15th year of your mortgage, most of your mortgage payments are actually going to pay down the principal. Now, what happens if you refinance to another 30-year fix? Well, you've reset the clock, right? You reset the clock to pay another 30 years. And that first payment on your 30-year fix, 95% of it's going to go to interest. So you have to really think twice about, I'm saving on a monthly basis. That's not the end all be all. You want to be very smart on. There's a difference between being the cash flow and then your ability to service and pay down the debt.
So any other tips that you would have to help save money? Actually, I guess we can go back to talking about student loans really quickly. I know there is that pause right now, but for those people who are able to make those payments, should they be doing that, or should they be keeping that money in a savings account right now? What would you advise?
If you can get some kind of deferral on making the payments, absolutely. I mean, do it. You want to improve your cash flow situation any way you can. So lumped in with all those other liabilities that we talked about earlier, student loan debt is definitely one of the calls you should make, because it is discussed in the CARES Act. And if you can get some kind of relief for any number of months just to improve your cash flow standpoint, by all means, make that call.
And Ceasar, and that should be any cash flow savings you make there, the prioritizing it should go building up your emergency fund first. So whatever deferment or forbearance or whatever you can get from mortgage, rent, auto loan, insurance, everything should be going to build up an emergency fund to make sure that we can weather whatever, however long this is going to take before it goes to long-term investments, paying down credit card debt, right? And just so there's sort of a priority of what bucket things should go into.
Absolutely, the way we described it. Any cash flow savings you have, again, it's time to batten down the hatches. Don't know, it's a pretty murky outlook over the next 6 months. Economically speaking, on so many different levels. So you want to keep that cash flow close. You want to keep it liquid. You don't want to be plowing it into the stock market. As much as you might want to pay down credit card debt, you have to understand, it's great to pay down credit card debt, but then now you don't have the liquidity. You can't get that money out, right? Once it's in to pay the debt, that's it. So at least for the foreseeable future, you want to keep your cash flow pretty tight.
Since you brought up credit cards, do you have any other advice about, how people should be using credit cards right now, if at all?
They're evil. They're evil. I'm sorry, and I'm gonna speak very strongly on this. I think credit cards are a way of financial slavery. Draconian interest rates of 25, 30%, forget about it. If you can stay away from it, stay away from it. At least for those where you're carrying a balance. If you can pay off the balance every month, great. You can take advantage of mileage and points and whatnot. But generally speaking, credit cards, paying interest on a credit card is just a lose-lose situation. For those in the audience that are lucky enough to be homeowners, I would recommend getting a HELOC, a home equity line of credit, rather than using a credit card. Now, a home equity line of credit is basically like a credit card, but unlike credit cards, which nothing is secured with credit cards, meaning if you decide not to pay your credit card companies have no recourse. They can't come at you. Whereas a HELOC, which is why credit card companies charge you exorbitant interest rates. Now, a home equity line of credit, it's backed by your home, the equity in your home. So you might have a $50,000 credit line with your credit card, but at 25%. Your home equity line of credit might be $50,000, but it would be at 5%, a much better rate. And I would say everyone who has a home should have a HELOC for emergency purposes only, rather than relying on a credit card.
We just received an interesting question. For someone in their mid-30s with no kids, does it make more sense to save for a home or to save more in your 401k if you can't do both?
Getting a little nitty gritty. Well, but that's exactly what I love. I believe that people can do both for the most part. It's a matter of time horizon, and there is a give and take. You should absolutely be saving in your 401k for retirement, but you have shorter term goals, right? Retirement may be 30, 40 years away. Whereas your short-term goal of buying a home in the next 5 years is, so it's really that's a more expanded conversation of what's my time horizon, what resources am I willing to commit to my shorter-term goal versus my longer-term goal. And I would encourage that person to really seek out like a financial planner to answer that. It's not a clear-cut question. I wish I could give you more, but
yeah,
I believe you can do both. It's just a matter of drawing it out in a plan.
But Ceasar, one answer you could say there is, if somebody's getting a 401 a match from their employer, would you say first and foremost take advantage of the match? If they're going to match 4%, would you go at least that far as to say, you're never going to do less than what your employer matches in your 401k, because that's effectively free money, right?
Right. You answered the question, Bill. You knew that. That was a softball question, but yeah.
Well, no, but I don't know. Yes, but I would think so. But anyway,
no.
I don't know. But okay. Well,
you want to take advantage of any company match. That is a guaranteed return on your investment there, right? If your company's willing to match 4% to 100% of your first 4%. Yeah, you're doubling your money. The first 4% you put in.
So what about for those people who are unemployed right now or whose employer doesn't offer a 401k match? What are some other retirement options?
Right off the bat, you can participate into a Roth or a traditional IRA, depending on a level of income. What you said, they're employed, just their employer doesn't offer. Yeah. So your choices are Roth and traditional IRA. And depending on what your earnings are, you may or may not qualify for a Roth, or you may be phased out of a Roth. The great thing about a traditional IRA is you'd be able to deduct it from your tax return, whereas a Roth you won't. But because you're putting in post-tax dollars into a Roth, later down the line, when you remove monies from that, they will be taxable. Great question. There's another question. How many more questions are there?
We have some time. You can feel free to start jumping into those questions. Let's see. What are some tips regarding rebalancing your 401k at this time, since the market has been so volatile?
I would say, like if you're responding to the headlines that are out there, you're more likely to make a mistake, because like human nature forces you to do the opposite of what you want to do. When things are down, people are afraid and scared, and so they don't want to invest. And in the most simple sense, as an investor, your goal is to buy low and sell high. So as much as you can systematize when you rebalance, put a little alert on your calendar, have it pop up every 6 months. I think that's the best way to ensure that you're following a plan long term. If you're trying to time when you rebalance, you run the risk of, rebalancing when things are really good and you're saying, oh, I'm going to put more money in the stock market by rebalancing, just to have, us go through a period like we just had where things have been volatile. So try to avoid timing your rebalances and instead opt for a systematic schedule, would be my recommendation there.
Let's see what other questions we have coming in. This is a fun one. Any suggestions for finding a good financial advisor when you don't have a large portfolio? What should you be looking for, and how do we find that person?
That's a great question. So for those who are looking for a financial advisor, I would highly recommend going on to the CFP website, and they've got this great, 10 questions you want to add when you're interviewing a financial advisor. Everything from, what do you do? What do you cost? What are your qualifications? How do you work with clients? So it's a very comprehensive list of questions that you'd want to, while you're interviewing certified financial planners or financial advisors. So again, that's cfp.net, I believe, but the CFP organization has that as a resource for you to while you're qualifying the people that you want to work with.
It's always a good idea to plan on speaking to a few people. Oftentimes people will have one conversation with one person and just go, hey, this seems okay. I think a good step is to take the time to have a couple of informational phone conversations with a few different planners, a few different advisors, and don't make a rush decision.
What about
personality is a big fit too? A lot of it will come down to personality, and it's got to feel right. And if it doesn't feel right, it doesn't matter if they answered every question perfectly to your satisfaction. It's got to be that.
So even if you're, in your 20s and you don't have, too much money to play around with, do you still think having a financial advisor is wise to spend that money on?
That's a good question. I believe
yeah, that is good.
But I get it. I mean, if the question is if I'm in debt overall, I just graduated and I've got more debt than assets. Can I really spend X amount of dollars on professional financial planning services? That's a tough question. I mean, it does cost. It does cost. I'm not going to lie, but I guess the question you have to ask yourself is it worth? Am I going to get more value than I'm paying? Because if that's what if you're going to get more value than what you're paying, by all means, net, you're ahead.
Yeah. Okay, we got another question. Car dealerships are offering great deals right now. Is it a good time to buy? And what should you bring to the table to get the best deal?
Wow. I think I saw an ad. I can't remember what manufacturer was. I think they're doing 0% for, I want to say it was 72 months or something I saw. I mean, just unbelievable. I don't know. Caesar, you want to tackle buying a car? Or I think if you are in a position where your job is secure, your finances are secure, you've got the 3 to 6 months emergency fund set up, and sure, take advantage of this. It's a great opportunity to get great financing deals. But I think also on the other hand, though, I would maybe look at this as if things are going to potentially get worse before they get better. Could you make your used car work for another 12 months, 24 months? I assure you, those great financing deals. There's always going to be another new car. There's always going to be some good financing deals. But that might be one extra expense that you could forego and use the difference to beef up your emergency fund.
Sure. I mean, cars are expenses. They're not investments.
Right.
Those are expenses.
So what about? So we pause there.
Or do we lose Caesar?
Oh,
Are you back?
am I back?
There you go. There we go.
Sorry about that.
You may have missed the last 5 seconds of what you said.
What was the question? No.
All right.
Automobiles are expenses, so we'll just leave it at that. I think right now, if you can help it, I'd probably stray away from like really big purchases right now.
And including home buying?
Home buying is a little bit different. We just had some clients recently purchase a home, and I mean they closed in the middle of the COVID crisis when everything was shut down. And what I told them was, as long as you have a long-term outlook on the home, are you going to stay in this home for 10 years or more? To Phil's point earlier, you can't look at, let's look at these last 3 months and make a decision. However, if you know that you're probably not going to stay in the home very long, I'd shy away from it. I'd shy away from purchasing right now. I'd want to know that I'm going to stay in that home for a pretty long, an indefinite amount of time. But I wouldn't be too gun shy. And actually, housing prices have gone up, which is very interesting too. Yeah.
So as we have just, about 10 minutes left, you each maybe just give us your big 1 or 2 takeaways of your recommendations and action items.
Oh, wow.
Just 1 or 2?
Just 1 or 2.
I think for me is the cash flow. Call up all your liabilities, school loans, credit card. You want to build a cash moat around you right now. And that goes for everybody who's, whether you're 20-something, 70-something, retired, accumulating assets, getting out of debt. I think that's going to hold true for everyone. You want to put yourself in a better cash flow position than you were before. And a lot of that is how you service debt. And I think another important part of that is how your spending habits, budgeting. Make sure that you're doing right by you, and put yourself in a good position to have a lot of dry powder, liquidity, cash on hand.
Is that my cue for my takeaways now?
Either that or I timed out again.
I don't think you
Yeah, no, I guess like from an investment standpoint, which is kind of the side of our operation that I'm more involved in. I think like this is truly an unprecedented time. Never had anything like what's happened over the last 3 or 4 months happen, and so I think from an investment standpoint, expect the unexpected. And just because an unexpected thing happens doesn't mean you got to go rush out and make some change. Because usually if you react to something, you're likely making a bad decision. And so as much as you can be on some sort of autopilot, you've got some sort of a written plan that says, okay, we're contributing this much, whether it's in my 401k or my IRA or whatnot. And I have got 60% stocks, 40% bonds, or I invest in these assets. I rebalance on a quarterly basis, and you, as much as you can, let your emotion get out of the way, because especially with everything that's been going on, it's really hard to not take that, not look at what's going on in the headlines and say, oh, I've got to go check on my account. I got to go make a change. And I can tell you, there are plenty of people that made decisions back in March that would otherwise, right now, love to take those back. So
the best advice we gave clients when this happened was, don't look at your retirement fund. You're not going to access that fund for another 20 years. Don't look at it, because if you do, it's
just be upset.
going to be upset when, and those people who followed the advice of not looking at their 401ks or whatever have you, they're fine now, right? They saved themselves a whole lot of heartache. They didn't make rash decisions either which way. So, long-term outlook, guys. Long-term outlook.
Mm-hmm.
Those are great pieces of advice. So Phil, I mean, earlier you were talking about the stock market and that it actually, it looks good right now. And so what do you think is affecting that?
Okay, so when you say it looks good, so the stock market has had a great run from late March up until the last couple of days here, and actually I believe I saw a headline that it was the best 50-day return in the history of the stock market, positive return. Now, of course, that followed the fastest decline ever recorded in the stock market, back in March. So, look, the stock market goes both ways, up and down, and when it tends to move, fast in one direction, it's going to move fast the other way. But step back from, does the stock market look good right now? What you have is the kind of greatest, kind of economic catastrophe the country's ever faced, squaring off against the most intervention by the government into our economy that's ever occurred. So the Federal Reserve is because they're putting more than $3 trillion into financial markets to try and prop things up to make sure, that markets don't freeze. We've obviously had the CARES Act, which put a ton of money into people's pockets, the $1,200 stimulus checks, enhanced unemployment benefits. And so right now, the stock market is thinking that the government stimulus is going to be enough to get us all the way through this. But there are some landmines ahead that we could hit. Do we have a second wave of the coronavirus? Does it take longer to get a vaccine? There was a really good analogy actually that Ray Dalio used in an article that I read this morning. He said, this is the equivalent of living through a tsunami. Water has come ashore. We know all of the buildings and all the businesses are underwater. And we're waiting for the water to go back out for us to go in and assess the damage. Until economies open back up, people can go back to their business and see just how much do their customers come back and need their services. We don't really know what the economy is going to look like, in the third or fourth quarter of this year. So, but the stock market is a discounting mechanism. It is discounting what it feels is the most likely outcome. And the fact that it's bounced back this much suggests that there's hope that we get through the other side of it. Where we go from here, who knows? There's too many variables to try and make a call. But I would say, the same as we're talking about with managing your cash flow, being a little defensive during this time period, I think makes sense, certainly.
Yeah. We have one question, and they're asking you to take out your crystal ball because they want to know if the stock market's going to take another dive in the fall. Any predictions?
Oh, wow. That's wow. Okay, so this is I am not a stock picker. I'm not a market timer. But one thing that we do we do study the history of economic cycles quite a bit, a ton, and we look at large swaths of data to try to determine where we are in the economic cycle. It'll be a big question if the Federal Reserve can really pull this off and can get us out of this, which is why I think Ceasar and I are telling you, you've got to be prepared for this to take a long time. And it wouldn't surprise me if we see the economy does not just snap back and everything's back to normal in 3 to 6 months. You're going to have some businesses that are significantly impaired. And it's likely to be tough sledding for a period of time. What that looks like, I don't know. We every week we're looking at incoming data that comes in, and things are improving, but also it's never been as bad as what we saw a couple months ago. So that's a long-winded way of me saying I would say the probabilities of us having a tough road over the next 12 months is probably pretty high. But I wouldn't say I'm going to go bet the farm one way or another. I would want to stay balanced. And the better thing is to manage your expectations. And if you can change anything, if you can increase the amount that you're saving, that's a better outcome than trying to anticipate, is the market going to go down over the next 6 months or up over the next 6 months? Unfortunately, in my experience, I found more people will get that wrong and cause more harm than they will good.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I tried to answer as many questions. I saw some questions in the queue. I tried to answer as many of them. I typed out answers to them. Some of the questions are a little specific. And so by all means, if you have more specific questions, certainly reach out. We want to keep this particular conversation more general as to, so more people would kind of benefit from it rather than highly specific questions. Is there anything else that, how can you get our emails? We will send that out. Is now a good time to refinance your mortgage? I think I talked about that earlier. Remember, when it comes to refinancing your mortgage, you want to look at the rate, you want to look at the costs, you want to juxtapose it to your current mortgage, and there is a way to kind of run that analysis to see whether or not it's beneficial. Resources for teaching personal finance to young children. That's a great one. I do not have one yet. I have a 9-year-old daughter, and I haven't looked into any resources to teach her about money. So, sorry.
Maybe you'll have to create something.
So there, Ceasar, I'll give you one. There is a book called "It's a Money Thing," a girl's guide to finance, and it's a book specifically for young girls that breaks down the basics of money in really simple lessons. I believe you can find it, on Amazon. Ceasar, I have a copy of it, so I'll give it to you when I see it.
Yeah.
But it's a money thing. You could Google it, look it up. It's a good resource.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Phil. That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think just our last comment that I'll share is, thank you to Ceasar and Phil. This is incredibly helpful. Proud to be a Bruin. So, thank you for sharing that comment. So I think we'll wrap it up here. I know we could continue to talk about this for hours, but we only had 1 hour today. So, thank you both so much for sharing your expertise. I'm sure our viewers have even more questions now, but we really appreciate you getting the conversation started as we all plan for these uncertain times. And so, as I mentioned before, this recording will go up on the UCLA Alumni YouTube page. And then after this webinar, there'll also be a short survey, and we really appreciate it if you could fill that out for us. And so thank you again for attending, and we hope that you do stay connected with the UCLA Alumni Los Angeles Downtown Network. We actually have an event coming up on Thursday, June 25th at 8 a.m. It's going to be a virtual morning mixer. Great opportunity just to network with Bruins downtown. And so we'll also send out those details in the email. So that's about it. Thank you so much. Stay well. Phil, Ceasar, thank you again so much for your time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Go Bruins.
Go Bruins. Take care.